$312 billion, one congresswoman, and a room so silent you could hear a nation hold its breath. When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez uncovered tax breaks buried deep in Trump's budget, was it courage or a political suicide mission? And if the powerful can rewrite the rules in secret, who's really paying the price? The rain slicked the marble steps of the Capitol as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tightened her grip on a black folder marked "Restricted." Inside lay evidence of $312 billion in tax breaks, hidden lines in a federal budget that could change everything. The hearing room was suffocating, thick with heat and unspoken tension. Reporters whispered. C-SPAN cameras blinked red. At the far end, Donald Trump sat unnaturally still, his eyes fixed on her. She took her seat, exhaled once, and leaned toward the microphone. Somewhere in America, a single mother paid her rent late again. This wasn't theory. This was the cost. The rain came down in sheets, streaking across the marble steps of the Capitol like veins of cold silver. Inside the Rayburn House office building, the air was thick, heavier than the storm outside. People moved with the hushed urgency of a hospital waiting room, their whispers barely audible over the steady hum of the C-SPAN cameras. Staffers clutched coffee cups too tightly. Pages shuffled papers that didn't need shuffling. Something was off. Everyone felt it. It was supposed to be just another budget hearing, the kind that bored even the most dedicated policy wonks. But today, the chairs along the back wall were filled. Reporters leaned forward, phones ready, eyes sharp. The doors at the far end creaked open, and for a moment, the room collectively held its breath. Donald Trump stepped inside. No one moved. No one spoke. A president doesn't attend these hearings. They send surrogates, memos, pre-recorded remarks. But there he was, larger than life and yet smaller somehow. His famous swagger muted by the oppressive quiet. His tie was slightly loose, his expression unreadable. Secret Service agents flanked him like shadows with eyes. A journalist whispered, "Why is he here?" Another answered without looking up. Control, optics, fear. At the opposite end of the long oak table, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat motionless, her burgundy suit immaculate. A single gold pen aligned perfectly with a black folder marked "Restricted." She didn't flinch as Trump's gaze swept over the committee, lingering just a second too long on her. The chair cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly as he began the perfunctory welcome. But no one was listening. All eyes were on two people, the sitting president, who wasn't supposed to be there, and the congresswoman who might have the only folder in Washington capable of making him show up. Trump didn't sit right away. He placed his hands on the back of the chair, scanning the faces arrayed in front of him like a man assessing a jury. Then he lowered himself deliberately, the leather squeaking under his weight. "Let's make this quick," he said flatly. "America's watching." AOC tilted her head slightly, her eyes locking on his. No smile, no blink. The chair nodded stiffly. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez, you have the floor." She didn't shuffle papers, didn't clear her throat. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice calm but edged like a drawn knife. "I'm not here to waste anyone's time, least of all the American people's." Her hand rested on the folder, fingers tapping once. "Last night, I received documents from the Congressional Budget Office. Documents this committee never saw. Documents edited weeks before submission." The words hung in the air, sticky and suffocating. A few senators shifted uncomfortably. Trump's expression didn't change, but his fingers began drumming softly on the table. "These edits," AOC continued, "aren't minor. They're worth $312 billion in tax exemptions. Tax exemptions that disproportionately benefit luxury real estate developers operating through shell corporations. Many of those corporations," she paused, her eyes narrowing just slightly, "trace directly or indirectly to Trump Organization affiliates." A gasp, just one, but loud enough to break the unnatural silence. Trump leaned forward, his voice a sudden bark. "This is a disgrace. Lies. Fabricated Democrat lies. He jabbed a finger toward her. You should be ashamed of yourself. AOC didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. I'm not finished, she said simply. The chair banged the gavel once, reminding everyone to respect decorum. But decorum had already fled the room. C-SPAN cameras zoomed in, capturing every twitch of Trump's jaw, every shift in AOC's steady gaze. Reporters in the back row leaned forward as though proximity might give them the next headline faster. AOC flipped open the folder. Pages thick with annotations stared back at her. She held up one document for the cameras. Appendix G48L, edited on January 19th, edited again on February 6th. The second edit removes the cap on real estate depreciation deductions and adds a deferred capital gains reinvestment clause. Projected revenue loss, $47 billion over 5 years. Trump's knuckles whitened against the table's edge. I don't know what that is, he snapped. Could be fake. Could be Russian disinformation. Who knows? But no one laughed. Not even the usual loyalists seated behind him. AOC's voice never wavered. The document is real. It was authenticated by bipartisan analysts, including some appointed during your administration, just this morning. Trump's lips tightened. His eyes flicked briefly to a staffer standing against the wall. The chair leaned forward, his voice almost pleading. Congresswoman, are you alleging the president personally benefited from these edits? AOC closed the folder with a soft thud. I'm not alleging. I'm citing evidence. The silence that followed wasn't the usual Capitol Hill silence. It was the sound of a room realizing it was now part of history. Reporters typed furiously. Phones buzzed in the gallery. Somewhere in America, a grandmother watching C-SPAN at her kitchen table whispered. Finally, Trump straightened suddenly, his voice rising. You people don't understand. This budget is the best thing to happen to this country. Businesses are winning. Jobs are up. America's winning. AOC didn't respond right away. She let the words hang there like smoke in a closed room. Then she spoke softly, almost too softly. Who is this budget meant to serve? Mr. President, the family in Tucson choosing between rent and insulin or your own empire. The question cut through the room like a blade. For a full 7 seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. And in those 7 seconds, America wasn't watching a budget hearing. It was watching a reckoning. The weight of her question still hung in the air when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez slowly reached for the black folder sitting before her. The label was clear, almost ominous. Restricted, eyes only. The room's tension, already razor-sharp, seemed to tighten further as her fingers brushed over the edge. Across the table, Donald Trump's eyes locked on hers with a predator's stillness, then softened into a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Another stunt. Alexandria, he said, voice low but cutting, like a man so sure of the game he no longer bothers to hide his disdain. She didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, her mind flicked back to the night before, to the quiet knock on her apartment door that came far too late for visitors. The corridor had been empty when she opened it, except for a padded envelope lying on the floor. No note, no sender, just a small USB drive sealed inside. She stared at it for a full minute, weighing the risk, before picking it up with a napkin and placing it on her kitchen counter. The drive sat there like a sleeping viper as she paced the room, phone in hand but unwilling to call anyone. Finally, she plugged it into an old laptop she kept offline for moments just like this. What appeared was not just data, it was dynamite. Hundreds of pages of internal White House emails, threads between senior advisors and economic staffers, subject lines chilling in their bluntness, adjustments for executive review, sensitive items, delay disclosure, ensure Section G48L remains untouched. She had scrolled through line after line, eyes narrowing as the scale of it became clear. Hidden in the fiscal year budget were changes so surgical, so precise, that most committees would never catch them. But the impact was staggering. $312 billion in tax exemptions for luxury real estate developers. And not just any developers, several traced back, directly or through layers of shell corporations, to Trump Organization affiliates. Back in the hearing room, she slid the folder closer. Trump's smirk widened as if to say, "Go ahead. Open it. Let's see if you've got the guts." Reporters leaned forward, some holding their breaths as camera lenses zoomed in. AOC's hand paused on the clasp, her thumb resting for a moment as if she were weighing more than just paper. She knew what would happen when she flipped it open. This wasn't just political theater anymore. It was a lit fuse. "I don't want anyone in this room to take my word for it," she said finally, her voice calm, deliberate. "So let's look at the words of the president's own advisors." She unclasped the folder with a soft click, and the room seemed to inhale. She pulled out the first document, a printed chain of emails, the dates and names clear as day. Holding it up, she began reading aloud. "Ensure Section G48L remains untouched before submission. Sensitive items must be shielded. CC'd to R. Bayfield, Senior Economic Advisor, and Garrett Nolan, Fiscal Policy Liaison." A stir rippled through the room. One Republican senator shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. Another whispered to her aide, who began typing furiously on a tablet. Trump's smirk flickered just for a second, but he caught it and hardened his expression again. "This is fabricated," he snapped, his voice louder now. "It's a setup, probably another Democrat hoax cooked up with the media." His hands clenched the table edge. "You people are obsessed with me." "Mr. President," AOC said softly, her eyes never leaving his. This came from the Office of Budget Oversight. It was logged and time-stamped weeks before this hearing. She laid out a second document, this one stamped confidential in bold red letters. A chart followed, simple but devastating, a red line climbing steeply, representing corporate tax cuts for real estate, while a blue line showing public infrastructure investment plummeted. "This isn't about obsession, it's about priorities," she said. "Who gets to prosper and who pays for it?" Trump scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "You're doing charts now. This is theater. I've seen better drama on CNN." A few loyalists chuckled nervously, but most people in the room stayed silent, watching, waiting. AOC reached for the next page but hesitated, her fingers tightening briefly. She thought about the email that had haunted her all night. Delay submission. Sensitive items must be shielded. The phrase replayed like a loop in her mind as she unfolded the next sheet and placed it on the table for all to see. It was an internal memo signed by R. Bayfield himself, recommending a set of carve-outs for qualifying partnerships, a term so vague it could mean almost anything. But the footnotes weren't vague. They referenced projects directly tied to entities with historical financial links to the Trump Organization. This alone represents a projected $47 billion loss in federal revenue over 5 years. AOC continued, her tone steady, almost clinical. "That's money no longer funding rural hospitals, veterans programs, or public schools. Instead, it's sitting in luxury developments in Florida and Manhattan." A voice from the back, a reporter whispered, just loud enough to carry holy hell. Trump leaned forward, his voice lowering into a growl. "You don't know what you're talking about. Alexandria, this is fake, stolen documents, Russian bots, whatever it is, it's not real." But AOC didn't flinch. She looked down briefly, exhaled, then returned her gaze to him like a surgeon before the first incision. "It's real, and the American people deserve to see it." The chair banged the gavel for order, but the room's energy had already shifted. Staffers were texting, reporters were leaving their seats, rushing to file stories. Somewhere outside, the rain kept pounding the Capitol dome, as if the sky itself wanted to drown out what had just been said. And yet, in the center of it all, AOC sat perfectly still, her hands resting lightly on the folder's remaining pages. She wasn't done, not even close. The weight of the folder's revelations had barely settled when the chair's voice broke the tension. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez, you have the floor." It wasn't just a procedural handoff. It felt like the starting bell of a fight everyone had seen coming, but no one truly expected to witness. AOC didn't hesitate. She straightened her back, glanced at the black folder once more, and then raised her eyes to meet the president's unflinching stare. Her voice was calm, deliberate, almost too even for the storm brewing around her. This isn't about left or right, it's about wrong. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples of murmurs spread across the room as journalists exchanged glances and staffers stopped pretending to look busy. She continued, sliding a single page out of the folder and holding it up for the cameras to catch. Buried within this fiscal year's budget are tax provisions so carefully disguised that most oversight committees wouldn't notice them on first pass, but their impact devastating. According to the Congressional Budget Office's own models, these hidden exemptions would result in 8 million families losing access to affordable health care and education over the next decade. A gasp not loud and but sharp escaped from somewhere in the gallery. A reporter's pen slipped from her hand, clattering softly against the tile floor. Trump's jaw twitched, his hands clenched and unclenched on the table. Then, with a suddenness that startled even his own aides, he spoke, his voice booming across the room. Fake news. Radical lies. This is nothing but another witch hunt. The Democrats are trying to smear my administration with phony numbers. He pointed a finger toward AOC, his face flushed with anger. You should be ashamed of yourself. Congresswoman, ashamed. The room tensed as if a fuse had been lit. Security shifted their weight, eyes darting between the two figures at the center of the storm. But AOC didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Her hands rested lightly on the stack of documents before her tone unshaken as she replied. The numbers come from your own CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, an institution your administration defended fiercely only 3 years ago. She held up another sheet, the CBO's seal prominent at the top. This report was finalized 2 months before this hearing. It projects a $312 billion revenue loss tied directly to luxury real estate tax exemptions. Many of those exemptions by way of shell LLCs lead back to affiliates of the Trump Organization. The chair rapped the gavel sharply. Order. Let's maintain decorum. But decorum was already gone. Replaced by the charged hum of a room on the verge of history, Trump leaned forward, gripping the microphone with both hands. This is political theater. I've built the strongest economy this country has ever seen. Jobs are up, businesses are thriving, and you sit here reading fake reports, trying to tear that down because you can't stand American success. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, a fissure in the armor of practiced bravado. AOC took a slow breath, her eyes locked on him with the kind of steady calm that unnerves even the most confident opponents. Mr. President, no one here is disputing job growth, but job growth doesn't mean much when families are choosing between rent and insulin. When public schools in rural Mississippi can't fix collapsing roofs because funds were redirected to luxury developments in Manhattan. She leaned forward slightly. Is that your definition of American success for a moment? The room was completely silent. No coughs, no papers shuffling, just the sound of the rain pelting the windows like an impatient drumbeat. Trump's face reddened further. You don't know what you're talking about. You're reading cherry-picked data from God knows where. And even if it were true, these policies fuel investment, growth things your socialist fantasies would never understand. AOC didn't bite. She didn't raise her voice or match his heat. Instead, she clicked a small remote in her hand, and a screen behind her came alive. A simple graph appeared, 2 lines diverging sharply after Q2 of the fiscal year. One read, climbing upward corporate tax cuts for commercial real estate. One blue, plummeting public investment in infrastructure and education. This isn't fantasy, she said, almost gently. This is what's happening. Your own economists ran these models. I didn't make these numbers up, they're yours. She turned slightly, addressing not Trump, but the committee and the cameras that were surely broadcasting every word. So I'll ask again, who does this budget serve, the billionaire developers buying beachfront condos, or the families watching their neighborhoods decay while paying more in taxes than some multinational corporations? The chair shifted uneasily, his gavel tapping once as if to remind everyone he still held authority, at least technically. A senator whispered to her aide. A reporter mouthed, "This is huge," to her colleague. Trump sat back, a tight smile forcing its way onto his face, but his hands betrayed him, fingers tapping rapidly against the polished oak table. "We'll see how far your little show goes, Congresswoman. The American people aren't stupid. They know a witch hunt when they see one." AOC didn't respond. She didn't need to. The documents on the table, the graphs on the screen, and the stunned silence of the room spoke louder than any retort. Somewhere in the back, a phone buzzed with an incoming news alert. Breaking: AOC unveils evidence of hidden tax breaks in Trump budget. Another reporter muttered under her breath, "This isn't just a hearing anymore. It's a trial." And as the rain outside intensified, slamming against the glass like a warning, it was clear to everyone present that the first strike had been made. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the storm inside Washington was only gathering force. As Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped out of the committee room, the sharp click of cameras followed her every move. Behind her, aides whispered frantically into phones. Reporters pushed against security barriers, and somewhere deep in the White House, a team of advisors scrambled to contain what was already being called the most explosive budget revelation in decades. By the time she reached her office, CNN's banner screamed in red, "Breaking: AOC exposes $3 trillion LP tax loophole tied to Trump Organization." Twitter had already exploded. The hashtag #BudgetGate trended at #1 worldwide. Clips of her calm but piercing delivery flooded every major platform. Even Fox News couldn't avoid covering it, though their tone was sharper. One anchor growled into the camera, "Is AOC staging a political circus, or is there something deeper here in the West Wing?" The atmosphere had shifted from irritation to alarm. Trump's press secretary went live within an hour of the hearing. "This is nothing but a desperate political stunt. Representative Ocasio-Cortez has shown time and again she will weaponize half-truths for her radical agenda," she said, her voice tight. But off camera, staffers weren't so sure. An aide was overheard muttering as she rushed down a hallway, "If those documents are real, we're in serious trouble." Back at her office, AOC sat in silence. She had turned off the TV, silenced her phone, but the notifications still came in like a relentless drumbeat. Messages from friends, constituents, colleagues, some supportive, others laced with warning. Then her personal phone buzzed, vibrating across her desk with a message from an unknown number. "You think this is your fight? You're wrong." She stared at it for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the screen. She didn't reply. Not because she wasn't tempted, because she couldn't afford to show her hand. Her chief of staff knocked gently and peeked in. "They're calling for interviews. CNN, MSNBC, even the Times wants a sit-down." AOC shook her head. "Not yet. Let the facts breathe first. This isn't about sound bites." In the White House, the president paced the Oval Office, his mood swinging between fury and cold calculation. "She's a grandstander. She's nothing," he barked at his senior advisor. "But she's got half the country eating out of her hand. I want a counter-narrative. Now." Within hours, conservative media outlets pushed a new storyline. The documents AOC presented were unverified, possibly leaked illegally, and certainly taken out of context. The words hit headlines with brutal speed. Meanwhile, outside Washington, the ripple effects spread. In a small diner in Ohio, a group of retired factory workers argued over their coffee cups. "She's a hero," one man said, jabbing a finger at the TV. Finally, someone saying it. Across from him, another shook his head. "She's playing politics. They all are. Nothing will change." But as a clip of AOC's question replayed, "Who does this budget serve the family in Tucson, choosing between rent and insulin? Or your own empire?" the room fell quieter than expected. Late that night, as staffers left one by one, AOC remained at her desk. She scrolled through news articles, reading every word carefully. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, but her mind wouldn't slow. Outside, The city hummed with late-night traffic, sirens wailing in the distance like faint echoes of the chaos she'd set in motion. Another buzz, another message. This one was shorter. Watch your back. She locked her phone and stared out the window, her reflection merging with the city lights. Somewhere deep in her chest, she felt the weight of what was coming, not fear exactly, but the heavy knowledge that the first strike had not gone unanswered. The weight of the anonymous threat still lingered in her mind when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's chief of staff entered the room. Face pale. "Alex, you need to see this." He handed her his phone. On the screen was a photo of her district office in the Bronx. Across the glass door, in thick red spray paint, someone had scrawled one word: traitor. The photo was already circulating on Twitter, attached to captions ranging from furious defenses to venomous condemnation. Her stomach tightened. "When did this happen?" she asked quietly. "Sometime after midnight. NYPD's already filed a report. No one was hurt, but the damage was done. Not to the building, to the air around her." That afternoon, as she walked through the Capitol halls, a colleague from her own party pulled her aside. He spoke in a low voice, eyes darting nervously. "Alex, they're going to destroy you. You know that, right?" She met his gaze without flinching. "Then let them try." He shook his head, almost pitying her. "This isn't about facts anymore. It's about survival. You don't win against machines like this. You disappear." She wanted to argue, to fire back with the righteous anger burning in her chest. But instead, she just nodded and kept walking. By the time she got home that evening, exhaustion pressed down on her like lead. She set her bag on the floor, kicked off her heel, and collapsed onto the couch. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. No TV, no phone calls, no aides buzzing about, just her and the sound of traffic below. She stared at the ceiling, the words from earlier echoing, "They're going to destroy you." She didn't realize she'd pulled out her phone until her thumb hovered over her father's number. She hit call. "Alexandria." His voice was warm, tired in the way only a man who's lived through decades of hard work could sound. "Hey, Daddy," she said softly. There was a pause. "It's late." "What's wrong?" She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. "Daddy, what if they're right? What if I've gone too far this time?" For a moment, there was only the faint crackle of the line. Then his voice came, steady and sure. "Truth has a price, baby, but so does silence." She swallowed hard, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. He continued, "You think I didn't know that? When I walked off the assembly line in '88 to protest unsafe conditions, they called me a traitor too, said I'd ruin everything. But if I'd stayed quiet, they'd still be breathing in asbestos today." She let out a shaky laugh, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's not the same. Daddy, this feels bigger." "That's because it is," he said gently. "But that doesn't mean you run. You do what's right, no matter the cost. Or else, why fight at all?" She stared at the wall, letting his words settle deep in her chest. The silence between them wasn't heavy this time. It was grounding. After they hung up, she sat there in the dim light for a long time, phone still clutched in her hand. Outside, horns blared and sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Inside, she whispered to no one in particular, "Truth has a price, but silence costs more." And though her body was tired, her resolve felt sharper than it had in days. The words of her father still echoed in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's mind as she sat in her dimly lit office the next morning, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. Truth has a price, but so does silence. She hadn't slept. The image of her Bronx office defaced with traitor replayed every time she closed her eyes. But now there was something even more pressing. A new leak. Her chief of staff burst in without knocking, holding a tablet. "You need to see this," he said, his voice low but urgent. On the screen was a PDF of an internal White House memo dated just weeks before the budget submission. The subject line, "Critical Edits for Executive Review." The signature at the bottom was unmistakable: R. Bayfield, Senior Economic Advisor to the President. The memo outlined proposed changes to the budget, including the removal of a cap on real estate depreciation deductions and the insertion of a vague clause about deferred capital gains through qualified partnerships. At first glance, it read like technical jargon, but AOC knew better. These were the very provisions she had exposed days earlier. Her eyes narrowed. "Where did this come from?" she asked. Her aide hesitated. "Anonymous source. It hit 2 independent newsrooms overnight. Both confirmed metadata and timestamps." She nodded slowly, her mind already racing. "It's real then?" "Most likely," he replied. "But they're spinning hard already." He tapped the screen, pulling up a live feed. On Fox News, Trump sat with a familiar air of defiance, his tie slightly askew, his expression carefully constructed. "It's all fake," he declared, his voice carrying that practiced mix of outrage and authority. "Probably planted by Russia or radical leftists. They'll do anything to bring down the most successful administration in history." He jabbed a finger at the camera. "The American people aren't stupid. They see through these hoaxes." Reporters fired back with rapid questions. "Mr. President, did R. Bayfield approve these edits, but he waved them off? I've never even seen those documents. It's a smear job. Disgusting." The feed cut back to the anchor, who smiled tightly and said, "We'll keep following this developing story." AOC leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't surprised. This was the playbook: deny, deflect, attack. But something about this felt different. Her phone buzzed on the desk. Another message from the same unknown number. "You think you're winning. This is just the surface." She didn't reply. Instead, she opened her laptop and began scrolling through the leaked memo again. Her eyes caught a line in the margin. "Ensure section G48L remains untouched." It was the same section she had flagged in her hearing. Same language. Same players. She glanced at the clock. In less than 3 hours, she would be on a call with 3 investigative journalists from the Washington Chronicle who had cross-verified the leak. Her team wanted her to go on air, to claim victory, but she hesitated. "It's too soon," she murmured to herself. "This feels deliberate." Her aide looked up. "You think it's planted?" She shook her head. "I think it's bait. Either to discredit me or to draw out whoever sent that USB." Across town, in a private White House meeting room, senior advisors huddled. One whispered, "We need to know who's leaking before this gets out of control." Another replied, "If we can paint her as working with a hostile foreign actor, we can bury her and the documents in one move." Trump leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against the armrest. She thinks she's clever, but let's see how she handles the next hit. Back in her office, AOC stared at the memo one last time. Her instinct screamed this was only the beginning. The real battle hadn't even started. The storm that had been brewing quietly outside the Capitol now seemed to echo inside as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked back into the committee room for the second hearing. The air was heavier than before, charged with an unspoken anticipation. Phones were already raised, cameras flashing as she took her seat at the long oak table. Members of Congress murmured in low voices, eyes flicking between their notes and the black folder in front of her. The chair cleared his throat and addressed the room. "We'll resume proceedings. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, you may continue your presentation." She gave a brief nod, then reached for the small remote resting beside her papers. The room fell into a restless silence, the kind that feels like the few seconds before a fire alarm goes off. With a soft click, a large screen behind her flickered to life. The first slide appeared a simple line graph with 2 colors. A thick red line arcing sharply upward, a thinner blue line plunging just as fast. A ripple ran through the room as staffers leaned in to study the screen. The chart was clean but brutal. Red labeled corporate tax cuts, real estate sector. Blue labeled public infrastructure investment. At the midpoint of the fiscal year, the 2 lines diverged sharply, red soaring, blue collapsing. Gasps came from several corners of the chamber. One senator muttered something under his breath to his aide. Another shook her head, lips pressed tight. From the gallery, reporters began typing rapidly, fingers flying across keyboards. AOC's voice cut clean through the whispers, calm but unyielding. This is not politics. This is math. She stood, allowing her gaze to sweep across the room. What you're seeing is the direct result of provisions buried deep in this budget, provisions that have redirected billions away from public projects and funneled them toward corporate tax relief. She gestured to the red line. Luxury real estate developers see gains. Investment firms see gains. The top 1% gains. Then her finger traced the blue line's descent. But public schools, healthcare clinics, infrastructure in rural and urban areas alike. Losses. Trump, seated across the table, leaned back in his chair with arms folded. His face was set in a mask of indifference, but his right foot tapped rapidly against the floor. He spoke suddenly, his voice loud enough to make a few people flinch. This is cherry-picked nonsense. I've never seen that chart, probably drawn up by some socialist intern in her office. He smirked, glancing at his allies behind him. It's called winning. America's winning under my policies. AOC didn't return his smirk. Instead, she clicked the remote again. A second slide appeared, a bar graph showing regional funding shifts. Red bars towering over blue ones. A subtitle read, Projected Deficits in Public Programs by State, Mississippi, West Virginia, Arizona, all showing deep cuts. These aren't my numbers, Mr. President, she said evenly. They're from the Congressional Budget Office. Your own economist ran these models. What you're seeing isn't a fantasy. It's a forecast. She looked directly at him, and the American people are paying for it. A Republican committee member leaned over to another, whispering urgently. In the gallery, a journalist whispered to her photographer. This is going to explode online. Trump's face darkened. You're grandstanding, making charts to scare people. The American people know the truth. They see the jobs. The stock market, yes, they see the jobs, AOC replied. But do they see their schools falling apart? Do they see their local clinics shuttered because federal funds dried up? Do they see that for every dollar saved in corporate taxes, $2 are lost in public investment? The chair tapped his gavel once. Order, but no one was listening. The room's focus had narrowed to the quiet congresswoman in burgundy and the president now visibly bristling. Another slide appeared on screen, a pie chart this time, its largest slice shaded in crimson. Total tax relief. Beneficiaries linked to Trump Organization. Direct and indirect 28%. A hush fell so complete it felt physical. A staffer dropped a pen. Fake, Trump said again, but softer this time, almost to himself. It's all fake. AOC closed her folder carefully, her voice low but clear. The numbers don't lie, but they do tell a story of who wins and who loses. This isn't about partisan talking points. It's about accountability. A single cough broke the silence. Reporters in the back row stood as if on cue, rushing out with their phones already raised to their ears. And in that moment, everyone in the room knew this wasn't just a budget hearing anymore. It was a reckoning unfolding live on national television. The room was still reeling from the graphs and charts when Representative Lynn Novak's voice broke through the heavy silence like a pebble tossed into still water. The moderate Republican from Iowa was not known for making waves. He rarely spoke in committee hearings, preferring to stay in the shadows, loyal to party lines but careful not to ignite controversy. That's why when he leaned into his microphone, cleared his throat, and said, I don't like her methods, but the math holds. It felt like the floor shifted beneath them all. Heads turned in unison. Staffers froze mid-text. Even AOC glanced his way, her expression unreadable, but her posture slightly straightening. Novak continued, his voice steady but measured. I reviewed these numbers with my team overnight. We cross-checked with independent economists. And as much as I might disagree with Representative Ocasio-Cortez on a dozen other issues, I can't stand here and pretend the data isn't sound. It is. We owe it to the public to acknowledge that. A ripple of murmurs spread across both sides of the aisle. Some Democrats looked vindicated, their lips twitching into restrained smiles. But among Republicans, the reaction was more complex furrowed brows, sharp whispers, and the distinct sound of aides typing furious notes on their tablets. One senator from Texas shot Novak a glare sharp enough to cut glass, but he didn't flinch. He folded his hands on the table, eyes fixed straight ahead. Trump, seated only a few feet away, turned slowly toward Novak. The president's face was a mask of controlled rage, his jaw tight. "So you're siding with her now," he said, voice low but carrying. "You're siding with the people trying to tear this country apart?" Novak didn't look at him. "I'm siding with numbers, Mr. President. I'm siding with facts." The simplicity of the reply seemed to sting more than any long-winded rebuttal. Outside the hearing room, the world was already spinning. Clips of the exchange went viral within minutes. On TikTok, short edits of AOC's graphs juxtaposed with Novak's quiet concession racked up millions of views. One viral caption read, "When even a Republican says she's right, you know it's bad." YouTube creators dissected the moment frame by frame, titles screaming "Republican breaks," rank an explosive budget hearing in AOC's numbers leave, Congress stunned, in living rooms across America, ordinary people who had never cared about federal budgets before were suddenly paying attention. A single mom in Ohio watched the clip during her break at a diner and shook her head. 8 million families, she whispered. "That's not politics. That's survival." At a barbershop in Atlanta, a group of men huddled around a phone replaying Novak's words, debating in low voices whether this would finally hold someone accountable. Back inside the Capitol, AOC remained still, her face calm but her heart pounding so loud she thought the microphones might catch it. She knew this moment mattered not just for the committee, but for the people watching, for those who felt invisible in the system this budget propped up. The chair rapped his gavel, trying to regain control. "Order. Let's proceed." But there was no denying it anymore. The conversation had shifted, and for the first time, cracks were appearing in the carefully constructed wall of party loyalty. Trump leaned into his mic, his tone sharpening. "This is all a setup, a circus designed to weaken this administration and empower radicals. And now you're giving them what they want. Novak." But Novak didn't reply. He simply sat back, arms folded, as if daring the room to challenge his integrity. It was subtle, it was quiet, but it was the first real sign that the tide was turning. The faint smell of stale coffee lingered in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's office as she opened the day's mail, her hands moving almost mechanically until her fingers brushed against a plain, unmarked envelope. No return address, no postage stamp, just her name in block letters across the front. Something about it felt wrong. She hesitated before sliding her letter opener under the flap. Inside was a single photograph. Her family, taken last Christmas in the Bronx. Her father laughing, her mother mid-smile, her little niece clutching a candy cane. Across the photo, in thick black ink, someone had scrawled 3 words in all caps: "Stay quiet or else." For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of her own breathing. She stared at the photo, her chest tightening as 1,000 scenarios raced through her mind. Who took this, when how close had they been? Her chief of staff's voice cut through the fog. Alex. He had stepped into the doorway, already sensing something was off. She quickly turned the photo face down and forced her voice to steady. "Just more fan mail." He didn't believe her, but he didn't press. Not yet. That night, alone in her apartment, she sat at the kitchen table staring at the photo again. The words felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on her chest. For the first time since this began, she allowed herself to ask the question she'd been avoiding. Was it worth it? Was exposing a $312 billion loophole worth putting her family in someone's crosshairs? Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of the spiral. It was an email from a name she didn't recognize, Hannah R. age 15. The subject line read, "Please don't stop." She opened it. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, I know you're getting a lot of hate, but I wanted you to know my school roof leaks every time it rains. We have buckets in the hallways. My little brother got sick from mold last year. If you can fix even a piece of this, please don't give up. We don't have anyone else. AOC read the email twice, then a third time. She let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The fear was still there, curling at the edges of her resolve. But so was something else, anger. Not reckless anger, but the steady, focused kind that had carried her through countless fights before this one. The next morning, she walked into her office with her head high. Her staff noticed the difference immediately. "We're still in," her communications director asked carefully. AOC met her gaze. "We were never out." She handed over the photo, her voice calm. "Turn this over to Capitol Police. Quietly. I don't want it leaking." Not yet. Meanwhile, across the city, the White House was in full damage control mode. Advisors debated whether to keep attacking her credibility or pivot to dismissing the hearings entirely. One aide suggested planting stories about her recklessness, jeopardizing national security. Trump, pacing the Oval Office, snapped. "I don't care how you do it. Make her look like a threat." Back in the Capitol, AOC prepared for her next appearance. She knew the stakes were higher now, not just politically, but personally. Yet she also knew she wasn't alone. Thousands of emails like Hannah's were pouring in. Parents, teachers, veterans, small business owners, people she had never met, telling her why she had to keep going. For the first time in days, she smiled not out of comfort, but out of certainty. Whatever came next, she was ready to face it, because staying quiet was no longer an option. The threats had grown quieter but no less dangerous when the first headlines appeared like cracks in a dam. AOC's nonprofit Ties Raise Questions read one op-ed in a major paper, its author a frequent guest on conservative talk shows. Within hours, similar pieces surfaced across multiple outlets. Did Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez overstep ethics boundaries? AOC's Dallas nonprofit oversight or opportunism? Each article followed the same formula of vague connection, a flurry of rhetorical questions, and a tone designed to plant seeds of doubt without presenting hard evidence. On Twitter, hashtags like #CrockettGate and #nonprofitscandal began trending. In newsrooms and comment sections alike, the narrative spread maybe she wasn't as clean as she claimed. In her Capitol office, AOC scrolled through the articles, her jaw tight. "They're coming for your character now," her chief of staff said quietly. "Not your numbers. You're dangerous because people believe you." She nodded, a cold calm settling over her. It was inevitable. Later that day, she agreed to an unscheduled interview on a small local radio station in the Bronx. No scripts, no staff, just her and the host in a cramped studio with peeling paint and the faint smell of coffee. The host leaned in, microphone live, voice low, but direct. "Congresswoman, people are asking, did you use your position to benefit a nonprofit you once worked with?" AOC didn't hesitate. Her voice was steady, deliberate. "I've made mistakes in my life. Who hasn't? But let me be clear, I've never stolen from the people I serve. Not a dollar, not a favor, nothing." She leaned closer to the mic, her tone sharpening just enough to cut through the static. "And I never will." There was a pause. Then the host, clearly taken aback by her candor, asked softly, "Why fight so hard when the cost is so high?" AOC's reply came without a beat of doubt. "Because if we stop fighting every time it gets hard, nothing changes. And people in my district, people across this country deserve more than resignation. They deserve results. Within hours." A clip of her answer hit social media. The rawness of her voice, the simplicity of her words, it struck a chord. On TikTok, it gained over 2 million views in 6 hours. On YouTube, it was climbing past 4 million by midnight. Comments poured in. "She's the real deal. This isn't about politics anymore. It's about decency. Back in Washington, a senior advisor to Trump scrolled through the video, frowning. "It's not sticking," he muttered. "The smears aren't sticking." In the West Wing, frustration mounted. The narrative they had carefully constructed was beginning to crack, not because it lacked teeth, but because the woman at the center of it refused to bend. And somewhere in a high school classroom in Pennsylvania, Hannah R. watched the viral clip and whispered to herself, "She's still fighting." The viral clip of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's calm defiance still dominated every feed when, deep inside the West Wing, a meeting convened behind doors so thick they seemed designed to muffle more than sound. The atmosphere was suffocating, not from the lack of air, but from the weight of the problem on the table. Trump sat at the head, arms crossed, his face unreadable except for the slight twitch in his jaw. Around him, senior advisors shuffled papers and avoided eye contact, knowing he was seconds away from snapping. "We need control," barked Gina Perez, his communications strategist. "She's winning hearts online. Every viral clip makes her look authentic, relatable. We can't fight her there. She's not untouchable," another advisor countered. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of tone that belonged more in a courtroom than a political war room. "Discredit her. If we can't kill the facts, kill the messenger." Trump's eyes narrowed. "Go on. Start with her record. Dig deeper into that Dallas nonprofit. Find board members, ex-employees, anyone with a grudge. Leak it. Frame it as a pattern of ethical lapses." He tapped a pen against the table, the clicks punctuating his words. "We don't need proof. We need doubt. Enough to poison her image." Perez leaned forward, her expression sharp. "And if there's nothing there, then we suggest something's there. Plant a question. Let the media do the rest. One headline. Did AOC use her position for profit? That's all it takes. People don't read retractions." Trump finally spoke, his voice low but laced with fury. "I want her reputation scorched. By the time we're done, she won't be able to run for dog catcher without someone calling her a fraud." Another aide, younger and less jaded, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, what about the risk if we overreach? It could backfire. She's different. People seem to trust her." Trump slammed a hand on the table, making several advisors jump, then make them stop trusting her. "She's making me look weak on my own turf. I won't allow it." The room fell silent, except for the faint hum of a heating vent. Someone scribbled notes, their pens shaking slightly. "All right," Perez said finally, breaking the tension. "We'll coordinate with friendly outlets. Push the narrative hard. Start with whispers. By the end of the week, we'll have her name dragging through the mud. Outside the White House, the city bustled unaware. But inside that room, a campaign was born not of policy or principle, but of calculated destruction. And as the advisors filed out one by one, the smooth-voiced strategist lingered, his parting words soft but chilling. "Remember, it's not about proving she's corrupt. It's about making people believe she could be." Trump didn't reply. He didn't need to. The plan was already in motion. The hum of New York traffic faded as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped out of the cab and into the familiar quiet of her father's Bronx apartment. The air smelled faintly of old wood and mint tea, the kind of scent that clung to childhood memories. It was late, nearly midnight, but she had needed this visit one night away from Washington's venom, one night to remember why she started. Her father, a retired postal worker with calloused hands and kind eyes, stood in the doorway wearing his threadbare Mets hoodie. He didn't ask questions. He just opened his arms. "Hey, baby girl," he said softly as they embraced. She felt the tension in her shoulders begin to loosen, if only slightly. "Rough week?" he asked as they stepped inside. "You could say that," she replied with a weak laugh. He moved to the small kitchen, the sound of clinking mugs and boiling water filling the silence between them. "Tea always?" They sat at the worn wooden table, two steaming cups between them. The clock ticked steadily on the wall as she stared at her reflection in the dark liquid. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "You look tired, Alex." She didn't deny it. "I am." Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. "They're coming after me harder now. Not just the politics, the personal stuff, old jobs, old friends. They're trying to turn every piece of my life into a weapon." He nodded slowly. "I've seen this game before. Back in the Union, when we fought for safer routes, they tried the same tricks. Said we were lazy, ungrateful, tried to pit us against each other." "What did you do?" she asked. "I didn't fight fire with fire," he said, taking a slow sip of tea. "I fought it with water, kept my head clear, stayed calm when they wanted me loud. And when I spoke, I made sure it was the truth that did the burning, not my anger." She turned that over in her mind. "It's hard, Daddy. Hard not to get angry when they're lying about you every day." "Of course it is. That's why they do it. Anger makes you sloppy. But water," he smiled faintly. "Water carves through stone. Alex, not all at once, but it does." She leaned back, the weight of his words settling into her bones. For the first time in days, she felt her pulse slow. When it was time to leave, he hugged her tight, whispering, "Remember, baby girl, it's not about surviving their fire. It's about making sure others don't burn in it too." Later, in her D.C. apartment, she stood in front of the mirror, staring at her own reflection. The face looking back was tired, yes, but also resolute. She whispered to herself, her voice steady. "This isn't about me anymore." And for the first time, she believed it. The Capitol was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. As Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked into the hearing room, she felt the weight of every camera lens following her steps. The committee chamber was packed, staffers lined the walls, journalists hunched over their laptops, and constituents from across the country watched from the gallery. She took her seat, her expression calm, but her pulse hammering beneath the surface. This wasn't just another hearing. It was a trap, and she knew it. The chair, a tall man with a practiced air of neutrality, called the room to order. His gavel struck like a warning bell. "Before we proceed, I must remind all present that any mention of the leaked documents may be considered a breach of conduct pending procedural review." His tone was pointed, his gaze flicking briefly to AOC. The message was clear: tread carefully or risk censure. Whispers rippled through the room. AOC kept her face steady, her hands folded neatly on the table. But inside, her thoughts raced. They were tightening the net. Deny her access to the documents, paint her as reckless, and hope the public forgot. She glanced down the row at Representative Lynn Novak, the moderate Republican who had quietly supported her during the last session. Their eyes met for a moment, and she offered him a small nod. But this time, he looked away. Later, when she had a chance to corner him in the hallway, he whispered under his breath, "Alex, I can't. The pressure's too much. My donors are threatening to pull out. I'm sorry." And just like that, her unexpected ally was gone. Back in the chamber, her political opponents began their opening statements. One by one, they painted her as a reckless firebrand, accused her of endangering national security, and suggested her actions were driven by ambition rather than principle. Each word was calculated, each accusation designed to push her into losing her composure. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she waited, letting their words echo until the room began to feel heavy with repetition. When it was finally her turn to speak, she leaned into her microphone, her voice low and deliberate. "I hear a lot about decorum, about process, about the rules we're supposed to follow. But I have one question for this committee: who enforces the rules when they're written to protect power? Not people." A murmur swept through the gallery. The chair banged his gavel. "Representative, this is not the time." But AOC pressed on, her voice steady. "This isn't about me. It's about the millions of families who've been left behind in budgets written behind closed doors. and I will not be silent because silence doesn't serve them. It serves you. The room fell silent again, this time not with hostility, but with the electric charge of a crowd realizing they were watching something bigger than a political spat. Yet in the corner, she saw a senior White House aide typing furiously on his phone. She knew what was coming next. This was only round one of the ambush. The chamber still hummed with tension from AOC's pointed question when she reached into her leather folder and pulled out 3 neatly labeled binders. Their spines read in bold letters, Draft A, Draft B, Final Budget. The weight of the paper seemed to echo in the room as she set them down, one by one, with deliberate care. 3 drafts, she began, her voice calm but cutting through the murmurs like a blade. 3 edits, 1 signature R, Bayfield. Eyes darted to the large screen behind her as she clicked a remote, bringing up side-by-side comparisons of key sections in the budget. On the left, Draft A showed language capping real estate depreciation deductions and allocating $8.9 billion to school infrastructure. Draft B revealed changes reduction of that allocation to $4.3 billion. The final budget. The school allocation slashed again to $2.1 billion, while a newly added urban redevelopment incentive funneled billions to shell companies linked to luxury real estate developers. This is not speculation. AOC continued. This is documentation, logged edits, metadata timestamps, and at the bottom of every altered draft, 1 signature, R, Bayfield. A wave of murmurs swept across the room. Committee members leaned into their microphones. Aides whispered frantically, and reporters in the back row tapped furiously at their keyboards. At the far end of the table, President Trump shifted in his seat, his face tightening as though trying to mask a growing unease. A Republican congressman from Iowa, known for his cautious approach, cleared his throat. Lynn Novak. All eyes turned to him as he leaned forward, his fingers steepled in front of him. We fact-checked. The room went still. We ran her documents through independent analysts. We called 3 former CBO staffers. He glanced down at his notes before lifting his eyes again. Voice steady. She's right. The edits are real. The numbers hold. The chamber erupted in gasps and scattered applause from the gallery. Some committee members exchanged wide-eyed looks. Others muttered under their breath. Trump's knuckles whitened against the armrest as he leaned forward, his voice rising with forced confidence. This is ridiculous. You're siding with her now. You're validating a partisan hit job. Novak didn't flinch. I'm validating facts. The chair's gavel slammed down repeatedly. Order, order, but order had already left the room. Journalists stood, cameras rolling as the scene unfolded in real time. On social media, clips were already being clipped, subtitled and shared 3 drafts, 3 edits, 1 signature. AOC didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply closed the binders with a soft snap and said, "This isn't about politics. It's about priorities. And the American people deserve to see who made those choices in their name." The room fell quiet again, but it wasn't the silence of indifference. It was the charged, expectant hush of a nation realizing the ground beneath them was starting to shift. As Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez left the hearing room, the air outside felt different, heavier, yet electric, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The first headlines broke before she even reached her office. Crockett's facts, hold under fire, blared across CNN's banner. On MSNBC, 3 drafts, 1 signature, AOC's case gains momentum. Even Fox News ran a segment with the cautious title, "Did Ocasio-Cortez just expose a $312 billion loophole?" The viral clip of her quiet but firm delivery. 3 drafts, 3 edits, 1 signature played on a loop across TikTok and YouTube, racking up millions of views in hours. Comments poured in from viewers who'd never tuned into a budget hearing in their lives. This feels bigger than politics. Why aren't they covering this more? She's the only one showing receipts. Hundreds of miles away, in a small Ohio town, the ripple became a wave. What began as a handful of retirees with handmade signs outside a courthouse swelled into a crowd of hundreds chanting in unison, "Taxpayers deserve transparency." Farmers stood shoulder to shoulder with nurses. Young students hoisting cardboard placards, reading, "Our schools, not their penthouses." Local news crews arrived first, their footage quickly picked up by national outlets. One woman, her voice shaking but resolute, told a reporter, "We're not here for parties or politics. We're here because we're tired of being lied to. If she can stand up to them, so can we." Inside the West Wing, panic was seeping through the cracks of carefully constructed strategy sessions. A senior advisor slammed a folder onto the table. "We've lost control of the narrative. She's not just surviving, she's winning hearts." Trump, pacing with a phone clutched in his hand, snarled, then hit her harder. "Find something, anything. I want her name dragged through the mud." But even some loyalists were whispering doubts. One aide muttered to another, "People aren't buying the smears anymore. She's too calm, too prepared." Back in her office, AOC scrolled through her emails. Hundreds of messages flooded in, some threatening, others desperate, but one caught her eye. A teacher from West Virginia had written, "You made them look. You made them listen. Whatever they throw at you now, remember you're not standing alone." She sat back, letting the words sink in. The truth was spreading not just in hearings or headlines, but in coffee shops, union halls, and living rooms. As dust settled over D.C., she stood by her window, watching the city lights flicker on, one by one. Behind her, the soft glow of her laptop screen illuminated her face as a news anchor's voice drifted faintly from a live stream. "For the first time, it feels like the tide may be turning," she whispered to herself, almost too softly to hear. "This isn't just my fight anymore." The glow of victory was still faint in the air when the pushback began to sharpen, morphing from whispers in the halls of power to shadows on the streets. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez first noticed it leaving her apartment late one evening. A black SUV idled across the street, headlights off, its tinted windows reflecting nothing but the glow of the street lamp. At first, she told herself it was coincidence, but the next night it was there again, parked half a block down, then again, following her car from Capitol Hill to her office in the Bronx. Her driver, usually unflappable, tightened his grip on the wheel. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," he muttered. At her office, the tension grew thick enough to taste. Staffers whispered nervously, their eyes darting to every unexpected sound. Then came the evacuation order. A suspicious envelope had been found in the mailroom. No return address, no postage, just her name scrawled across the front. The building was cleared within minutes, Capitol Police combing every corner with K9 units. It turned out to be a false alarm, just a blank sheet of paper. But the message was clear, someone wanted them rattled. Her chief of staff cornered her in the hallway later that day. "Alex, this isn't sustainable. The threats, the SUV. Now this, maybe take a step back. A short leave, just until things cool down." She looked him dead in the eye, her expression as steady as the first day she'd walked into Congress. "Not now. Not when we're this close." Across town, in a White House briefing room, the mood was different, agitated, electric. A senior aide slammed a folder onto the table. "She's not breaking. Every scare tactic, every planted story, it's not enough." Trump glared across the room, voice low but seething. "Then make her break. I don't care how." But back in her office, AOC sat alone, scrolling through the thousands of messages pouring in. Among them was one from a retired Navy mechanic in Ohio. "I don't vote blue, but I vote for honesty. Don't stop." She read it twice, then leaned back in her chair, her reflection staring back at her from the darkened window. Fear still coiled in her stomach, but it wasn't enough to shake her resolve. Not now. Not when the truth was finally too loud to ignore. The threats were escalating, the pressure mounting, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had learned to listen between the noise. She knew something was coming. It was in the way the silence shifted, in how aides walked faster in the halls, in the tight-lipped pauses during calls with journalists who suddenly couldn't comment yet. Then it came. Not through the media, not through a leak, but in a sealed envelope hand-delivered to the ethics subcommittee by someone no one had ever expected. Landon Shaw, a quiet, mid-level staffer from the House Budget Office. 36 years old, former Marine, known for his discipline and discretion, no social media footprint, no scandals. Just a man who'd sat in countless meetings and watched history bend in real time. His sworn statement, 6 pages long, signed under penalty of perjury, began with a sentence that hit like a lightning strike. I witnessed the edits. They were ordered from the top. The room froze as staffers read the first few lines. Shaw detailed the process, how initial drafts had been scrubbed of protective clauses for public programs, how entire sections had been reworded to favor real estate carve-outs, and most damning of all, how directives were relayed through encrypted internal emails labeled policy harmonization. But it was the next paragraph that cracked the story wide open. A name appeared, one that hadn't surfaced publicly in months: Garrett Nolan. A man whispered about in financial watchdog circles, but rarely seen. Known for creating labyrinthine shell structures that protected billionaires from taxes. AOC had heard the name before, once in a hallway conversation, once buried in a redacted memo. But here it was, printed in black ink in a sworn affidavit. I was instructed by R. Bayfield to implement edits suggested by Garrett Nolan, a non-governmental advisor with financial ties to multiple redevelopment funds. By mid-morning, the statement was verified, time-stamped, and filed. By afternoon, it was on every major front page. Whistleblower confirms budget manipulation, Trump linked to secret real estate advisor. On social media, the name Garrett Nolan surged in trending hashtags. Investigative journalists raced to connect the dots, and they found them. Nolan had financial fingerprints on at least 5 development funds that directly benefited from the urban redevelopment incentives quietly slipped into the budget. At a hastily called press conference, a senior GOP aide tried to dismiss Shaw's testimony. He's low-level staff, doesn't understand the full picture. But when a reporter asked whether they could confirm or deny Nolan's involvement, the aide stammered, then abruptly ended the briefing. In her office, AOC stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the Capitol crowd swell below. Protesters held signs now bearing Nolan's name. Who is Garrett Nolan? Show us the money. If this is legal, why the secrets? Her chief of staff entered, breathless. It's everywhere now. The Nolan connection, it's blowing up. AOC nodded, her voice calm. Good, because now they will have to answer questions they've avoided for years. But deep inside the White House, Garrett Nolan's name wasn't just trending, it was ringing alarm bells. Because some people had spent decades making sure he stayed in the shadows. And now, sunlight had broken through. The chaos outside her apartment window felt like another world. In here, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was alone. No advisors, no cameras. Just her and the faint hum of a city that never really sleeps. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, its sound loud in the stillness. Her phone sat on the table, screen dark. She hadn't touched it in an hour. Not after the news broke. Not after Garrett Nolan's name exploded across every platform. Not even after her chief of staff's urgent voicemail, Alex. They're pushing harder. We need to strategize tomorrow. She sat on the edge of her kitchen chair, elbows resting on her knees, hands clasped tight. Her eyes drifted to the fridge. On its surface, a faded sticky note clung stubbornly to the metal. The ink had smudged over time, but the words were still clear. Be the woman you needed when you were 12. She remembered writing it during her first campaign, a promise to herself and to the scared, quiet girl she used to be, the one who watched her parents struggle, who'd felt invisible in rooms full of power, who'd once believed the system would never change. AOC exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of it all settle on her shoulders. The black SUV outside, the evacuated office. The threats both whispered and screamed. Part of her wanted to pack a bag and disappear for a week, to breathe without the constant fight. But she didn't. She couldn't. "I won't let them erase this," she whispered to the empty room. She got up, pacing slowly to the window. Below, the lights of deep EEC stretched out like a grid of possibility and betrayal. Somewhere in those buildings, people were plotting their next move, desperate to bury Shaw's affidavit, to make the public forget Garrett Nolan's name, to twist her into a headline that read, "Radical, reckless, unfit." But for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel fear clawing at her chest. She felt something harder, sharper, a quiet resolve that settled like steel in her spine. She spoke aloud, testing the words as if saying them would make them real. "They're not afraid of me. They're afraid of what happens if I don't stop." Her phone buzzed on the table, flashing with another message. She ignored it. For now, she let the silence hold her, a cocoon against the storm raging beyond her walls, because tomorrow she would walk back into that hearing room. And no matter what they threw at her, she would not back down. The chamber was packed so tightly it felt like the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. Millions of eyes watched through screens across the country as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat at the center table. Folders neatly stacked before her, hands folded calmly. The chair cleared his throat, signaling her time to speak. Cameras zoomed in. Journalists leaned forward, pens hovering. She didn't flinch. Her voice, steady and deliberate, carried across the hushed room. "I don't want you to trust me. I want you to check me. Check all of us. Demand receipts. Demand answers. Because this isn't my money, it's yours. This isn't about party lines. It's about the people paying the price every single day for decisions made in secret." Gas rippled when she held up 3 drafts of the budget again, her finger pointing at the signatures. 3 drafts, 3 edits, 1 signature. You wanted to know who benefits, now you do. In the gallery, a child's voice whispered, just loud enough to be caught on a hot mic. "She sounds like she means it." The room fell silent again as AOC looked directly at the camera, her eyes unwavering, asking the question now echoing in living rooms nationwide. "Are you ready to hold us all accountable?" Weeks after the final hearing, the headlines told a different story. Congress had passed the Crockett Clause by a narrow but historic margin, requiring full disclosure of any tax exemptions exceeding $50 million. For the first time in decades, the quiet machinery of wealth redistribution was forced into the sunlight. Networks ran segment after segment of families finally seeing the trickle-down narrative collapse. In a small Kansas town, a local news station interviewed a mother standing outside her son's elementary school. She smiled through tears, her voice breaking as she spoke. "My son's school finally got its roof fixed. For 5 years we sent him to class with buckets catching rainwater. Now we don't have to." Across the country, similar stories emerged: clinics reopening, road repairs approved, after-school programs restored. In living rooms, people who once tuned out political hearings leaned forward with cautious hope. Back in her office, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stared out at the Capitol dome, her reflection faint in the window. She didn't smile. Not yet. The ripple was only just beginning, and somewhere deep down, she wondered if one clause could change this much. What else was possible? The Bronx summer air was thick with the scent of grilled corn and distant music as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat on the front steps of her childhood home, a popsicle in one hand. Her niece nestled beside her with sticky fingers and wide eyes. For the first time in weeks, there were no cameras, no committees, no black SUVs waiting at the curb. Just the quiet hum of the neighborhood she'd once walked through as a girl, dreaming of making a difference she couldn't yet name. Her niece bit into her melting treat and looked up with a grin. "Aunt Alex, are you famous now?" The question caught AOC off guard. She let out a small laugh, the kind that carried both exhaustion and something softer relief. "No, baby," she said gently, brushing a stray hair from the little girl's forehead. "I just told the truth really loud." Her niece tilted her head like she was trying to understand. then nodded solemnly as if this, too, was an answer worth carrying. In that moment, AOC felt the weight of the fight fade, not gone, but lighter, replaced by a quiet promise. She wasn't finished. Not yet. Would the world listen when it mattered most? This story isn't just about politics. It's about courage, the kind that doesn't roar, but stands steady when every force says, sit down. AOC's journey reminds us that truth-telling often comes with a cost: threats, isolation, doubt. Yet she chose to stay, not because she didn't fear the consequences, but because she knew silence would cost even more. It's a lesson for all of us, not just in leadership, but in everyday life. When we see injustice, do we speak up when we hold power? Do we use it to serve or to shield? The fight for accountability isn't reserved for Capitol Hill. It starts in homes, classrooms, workplaces, with ordinary people daring to ask hard questions and demand honest answers. You don't need to be famous to make noise. You just need to be unafraid of your own voice. What about you if it were your community, your family's future on the line? Would you have the courage to stand firm even when the world tried to break you? If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Alexandria Rising, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising.